season has been brought to you by Radisson Red, Johannesburg, Rosebank. Style you can bank on. Great day, everyone. Ed Dudley. I hope all is going well with each of you. And you already know, if you look at my background, you know I'm still in Durham, North Carolina. But it's football season here in America, so I'm excited. But I'm always excited to be looking at this amazing, beautiful soul from South Africa that I call my only girlfriend, as you know, if you've been following us. But I will digress and just simply say, good morning, Charmaine. Good day, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Zulued, and hello everyone. It's just me, always excited to be in the Ubuntu house with this incredible soul and just the amazing guests that we get a chance to chat with. So how's your day?
So day is absolutely wonderful. We're just starting here. It's only 8:30 here in the US. So my day just got starting full day. But this is an amazing way to start the day because I have our guest right now. I actually found him on TikTok. I have a unhealthy obsession that I'll go on TikTok and I go into this black hole called TikTok and I'll look up and I'll be on TikTok for an hour and I'm like, oh my God, I just wasted an hour of my time laughing. But I ran across his page and something said stay there. And I listened and I learned something amazing. But before we even talk about that, I just want to bring him in. And if you don't know him, after this, you're going to know him. You're going to want to connect with him. And you're going to want to learn his story and his family story because it's simply inspiring, amazing. I can go on and on. It's just an honor to bring him in. So let's just bring him in, Mr. Loki Mulholland. Great day, sir. How are you?
Oh, doing great. Doing great.
That's good. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's an absolute privilege to actually speak to the man who's in a mission to educate, to end hate. So welcome to the Ubuntu house. It's so lovely to see you and have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah. So let's get this conversation started. Let's just tell the people who you are, what you do, and more importantly, who your family is.
Oh, you want me to say that?
Yeah, I want you to say it. I mean, your
right.
family's absolutely amazing. Some of the things that that your mom has done here in the States, it just warmed my heart. Like as a Black man in the U.S. reading her story, it warmed my heart. And her story needs to be told a lot more. And we need a lot more people understanding who your mom is. And then you just picked up the torch right behind her.
Yeah. So my name is Loki Mulholland. I'm a filmmaker, author, and public speaker. That sort of stuff. And I happen to be the son of. I say the son because I have to qualify. She does have 5 boys, but when I say the son, what I'm really saying is the favorite son.
You own it.
Of Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, who's a civil rights activist, freedom rider. And by the time she was 19 years old, she'd been involved in about 3 dozen sit-ins and protests when she joined the Freedom Rides, and they took this iconic mugshot of her and then put her on death row. And that was the beginning of her story, I like to say. Because, I mean, she's kind of the Forrest Gump of civil rights. I mean, she's been everywhere. She knows everybody. When you name the person, name the event, and she's connected to it in some fashion or another. And it's quite striking, and she's well respected for that, inside and outside of the movement.
So, at what point did you understand and know who your mom really was? Because a lot of times we say our parents are just our parents.
Yeah. I still don't know who my mom is sometimes. But there's different points where you start to kind of understand. So there was one point when in high school, the picture of the famous Jackson Woolworth sit-in where there's the three people sitting at the lunch counter and they're pouring the stuff on people's heads, and that's my mom in the middle with Ann Moody and Professor John Salter, and we'd seen that photo our entire lives, several others, but it's just that's just mom, right? And then you like, why is this photo in the history books? What does that mean? And then I was doing this film on my mom called An Ordinary Hero about my mother and the student movement. And when I'd call and ask places if we can use a photo or call someone about doing an interview, they would always say, for Joan, anything. It's like, wow.
That's beautiful.
And then I was with Ruby Bridges, the Ruby Bridges. My mom and Ruby were receiving an award together. And Ruby took me aside and said, you take care of your mother. She's a national treasure. And when Ruby said that, it was like, wow. But my relationship with my mom, it's the son of a civil rights icon. And I remember, this kind of sums it up for me. I was at the home where Medgar Evers was killed. Rena Evers was there, Man Wright Edelman, my mother, Jerry Mitchell, and a few others. And there's these sort of individuals that were there that kind of with different groups. Now, Rena Evers is the daughter of Medgar Evers, the famed civil rights activist, leader of Mississippi, who was assassinated in 1963. And this lady comes up to Rena, and it was almost like a receiving line. She's on my right, my mother's on my left. And she comes to Rena, oh my gosh, Rena, how are you doing? Hugs and all this, right? It's the South. And, it's been so long. And then she comes to me and it's like, who are you? Right? And I'm like, really quickly, my mind going, if I say Loki, she's going to say, yeah, but who are you? Like, I can't place you. And so very quickly, I just said, oh, well, I'm Joan's son, pointing to my mom. Oh my gosh, Joan, I didn't see you there. It's been so long. Hugs, and moves on. And I'm like, really? And Rena leans over and whispers to me, don't worry, Loki, I don't have a name either. I'm just Medgar's daughter. And you spend your life, trying to be your own person, right? Yep. I wanted to go to Tougaloo College. I'm wearing this shirt, right?
I was going to ask you about that. We'll talk about that because a lot of people don't even know who Tougaloo College is or where it is.
Right. But I want to be my own person. I was 18 years old. If I went to Tougaloo, I would be in my mom's shadow. I mean, they've got 10-foot tall pictures of her on walls and stuff. I mean, you learn about her when you go to Tougaloo. I mean, she's a walking legend. And it was like, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person. I want to be my own person. And yet here we are 30 years later, and my whole world revolves around my mother, which I think for every child it should. But mine's a little deeper, of course. My work to preserve, share, and continue her legacy while teaching kids about the civil rights movement and how they can make a difference.
Yeah. You could have easily not picked up the torch and shared her story and kept her name out there and all the work that she's done. Why is my question. Why did you?
That's a great question. There are times when it's exhausting work. The toll it can take on you. And I'm just a white person in the U.S. saying this, right? When you talk about difficult things in our country, people don't like that, particularly when it's about racism and the history of racism and so forth. And so that's a real struggle. And I've gotten the death threats and the hate mail and those sort of things. This kind of comes with the territory. But her story is so unique. That she's a white Southern woman. She was exactly what the South was saying, why we needed slavery and Jim Crow and all those things. It was to protect our white women, our white Southern women, right? And here she was flying in the face of that, saying, I don't need your protection. I don't want it, right? And so that is so critical for representation's important. Right. And it goes both ways. White people need to see themselves as part of the solution, not just part of the problem. Right. And so she's a very powerful representation of that, of what when good, I don't want to even say well-intended, because that's not what that is, but people who choose the courage of their convictions decide to do something about it. And we look at these iconic images of her and so forth, but her story starts when she's 10 years old. And because people ask her all the time, why did you do it? What motivated you? She goes, well, I just believed what the Declaration of Independence said, which, believe me, people hate hearing that, Then she says, I believed in what I was taught in Sunday school, that we should treat each other the way we want to be treated. And when we do it under the least of these, our brethren, you've done it unto me. She says, all that good King James stuff. Right? She goes, I just put it into practice. Right? And she said, we're just a bunch of hypocrites. And then she sees that reality when she's 10 years old of separate but equal embodied in a schoolhouse for Black students. In stark contrast to the brand new brick school for white students. Right? And she said, this is wrong. I'm going to do something about it. And she'd get that chance in Durham, North Carolina.
Yeah. That is so special, Loki, at that age.
Yeah.
To have conviction, to be able to have the insights and the foresights as to what is it that she wants to put out into the world. So there's so much power to your mom. I mean, she's courageous, she's feisty, she's selfless. And I'm just grateful that she didn't follow the norm. She chose to step out. And that's such a beautiful thing. I saw her mugshots at the age of 19.
Mm-hmm.
She looked so carefree. There was like no fear in her face. Do you know what she was feeling at that stage? Did she ever share it?
With my mom, you always, if you don't ask, she's not going to tell you. And there's not, and she's just like, that was this one photo, one moment in time, and that's asked a lot. There's definitely that level of defiance you can see. She doesn't do fear, she says.
Oh.
Just that freezes you and keeps you from doing what you need to do. But there is definitely, she says, that in that moment of that mugshot, she knows their game. And you can see in the other mugshots, there are other white people, even African Americans, who they look terrified. Right? Yeah. Now, mind you, by the time she had taken that mugshot, she was a veteran in the movement, right, and still a teenager. But like I said, she knows the game. She's a white Southern woman, and she knows what it's all about, and she's not going to let them intimidate her. And so she's not going to give them that pleasure. That's what she's feeling. That's what she's thinking.
That's where the strength is, actually.
Yeah.
You don't give away your power. You own it. And...
So your mom leaves the prestigious Duke University, which happens to be.
She never wanted to go to the prestigious.
Yeah, and I want you to share that. Which is Duke is probably about 15 minutes from my house right now.
Right.
But can you share that story, because she didn't want to go to Duke, but she ends up at Duke University.
Right.
And then take us along that road going to Tougaloo College. If you can just share with everyone.
Sure.
About Tougaloo, where Tougaloo is, as well as in the context of our country.
Yeah. Okay. So, she's getting ready to go to college. She actually wants to go to a small church school in Ohio where her Sunday school teacher went. And her Sunday school teachers were John Glenn and his wife. That John Glenn, the first.
Are we talking about the astronaut John Glenn?
Yes.
That was her Sunday school teacher.
Right?
Oh, okay.
I told you.
We learn every day.
So she, but her mom wants her to go to a safe school, safe meaning segregated, because she's afraid that she might have, a classmate or heaven forbid, even a roommate who's Black. And so my mom, just whatever gets me out of the house, she's a teenager. I just got to get out of here. She goes to Duke. And if my grandmother wanted to keep my mother out of the movement, Duke was the worst place to send her, because right down the road on February 1st, 1960, was what's called the Greensboro sit-in, right? I think they try to say now the North Carolina A&T College, is that right? Sit-in. But The A&T 4.
That's what they're saying now. Yeah.
The A&T 4, right? Am I getting that right? Am I getting that
Yeah,
right?
you got it
Okay.
right.
So the A&T 4. And the very next sit-ins are in Durham. And at a church meeting, a Presbyterian church, the ministers, that, it's kind of this sort of secret meeting. They're meeting up and they're having these discussions with some demonstrators and so forth, and kind of talking about why legally and morally they should be doing this. And then they extend the invitation. Remember now, when she was 10 years old, she said, if I get the chance, I'm going to do something about it. Right. And so this was that big chance. Now, she had had some other opportunities earlier on at church, similar sort of things, where Presbyterian ministers said, we're going to have some meetings. And this was all in regards to Brown versus Board of Education, integrating the schools in Virginia. And they were having secret spaghetti dinners in the basement of the church with Black students and white students. Right. So that was her first time with a formal kind of social equal sit down opportunity with African Americans. Then she goes to Duke, and they do those demonstrations. She does some picketing and then does the sit-ins and gets arrested a couple of times. Well, Duke thinks that they can't understand why she's doing this. A white Southern woman would get involved in the movement. The only explanation is that she must be mentally ill. So they take her in for, mental examination and so forth. And she's not amused by that. She finishes out her semester. She always notes that. She goes, I didn't just drop out. I finished the semester. That's my grade. And then now at this point, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the student movement, most famously known for John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael and so forth. They had just recently formed. And so they were like, hey, what's going on with the students up in Howard? We haven't heard from them in a while. And this is kind of this sort of weird invitation. If they haven't got anything started, go get them moving. So my mom has no idea where Howard University is in DC. And this is an HBCU. So she goes up there. You can picture this 5'1" white girl with a Southern accent walking around this Black campus asking where the civil rights activist people are. I mean, that's things of that's something for a movie. But
that is definitely
it's something you should
a movie. So Charmaine, just so that you know, Howard is one of the prestigious historically Black colleges on it. So I'm thinking about in this time frame, at 5'1" woman walking on a Black college, like, we're the activists. I can only imagine the students looking at her like, well, okay, who is this mole that's sent up here to get us in trouble?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. But she finds that group, and come to find out, the next sit-ins they're going to be doing, within days, is going to be literally in the backyard of where she grew up at this at the local drugstore, which has the lunch counters, right? And so she has experience, and and so they go do that. In the midst of all of this, and then once they finish that, they actually get integrated and so forth, and they start finding things around DC area, if they, I forget what she has this great expression she uses. I forget what it is. But so they do that, Glen Echo Park and so forth. That even would go down to Rock Hill, South Carolina, when that group got arrested, just in support and so forth. But then Charlene Hunter Galt and Hamilton Holmes tried to integrate University of Georgia, and there's these famous photos of Charlene with clutching her rosaries and tears coming down her eyes from the tear gas and so forth. And my mom sees this and decides that, look, integration should be a two-way street. It shouldn't just be a bunch of Black students catching hell. That's what she says. And so she talks it over with Chuck McDew, who's the leader of SNCC at that time, and probably maybe Diane Nash and John Lewis and so forth. And about this idea of her integrating, a Black college. I think at the time it would have been called a colored school. They wouldn't have said HBCU at the time. They actually liked the idea, and they said, well, why don't you go to Tougaloo College in Mississippi? Because we haven't heard anything from those students, and if they haven't got anything started, why don't you get them going, right? And so she applies. The Freedom Rides happen, and as the Freedom Riders, they're getting attacked in places like Rock Hill and obviously Anniston, Alabama, the famous burning bus. And then they get trapped at a church in Montgomery. And a call goes out, Paul Dietrich, basement of the church. They all get time for one call. Dr. King's trapped with them too, by the way. When I mean trapped, I mean the Klan's outside. There's tear gas. The police are there and everything else. So Paul Dietrich calls my mother and says, we're trapped in the church. I don't have time. Just send more writers. So she gets a group together from Howard University, from that group called NAG, the Nonviolent Action Group. And her and amongst others, Stokely Carmichael, fly down to New Orleans where the Freedom Rides were supposed to end, and then take a train to Illinois Central to Jackson, Mississippi, thus integrating other forms of transportation. Now, this wasn't really about integrating the transportation as much as it was about integrating the transportation depots, right? And so the train station, and that's where she gets arrested, and the famous mugshot. Now, Tougaloo was ground zero for civil rights movement. If anything was going to happen in regards of organizing civil rights movement, it was going to be in Tougaloo College, Tougaloo, Mississippi, not Jackson, Mississippi, Tougaloo, Mississippi, which is right outside of Jackson. And Meg Revers, who was the field secretary for the NAACP in Mississippi, would also visit Tougaloo College to work with the students there as well and stuff. So there's that constant interaction. And Megger was based in Jackson. So this is, the central operating point for all things Mississippi. And Mississippi was the deepest of the Deep South, what they call the heart of darkness. The Jim Crow laws in the United States are based off of the 1890 Constitution that was rewritten to usher in Jim Crow. And all the other states that took Jim Crow and stuff and used it, base it off of that Constitution, where they went and started rewriting their own constitutions to legalize Jim Crow. And that's how my mom got there.
Wow.
What I don't, nothing makes sense when it comes to racial issues and segregation and things of that sort. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were basically testing a Supreme Court case, right? That ruled, yes. I think it was Boynton versus Virginia.
Very good.
That ruled that it was unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. And they were just testing those. And I can't understand why the police attacked them instead of supporting them, because they were not doing anything illegal, actually, because they've had
there's not much there's not much difference between the police and the Klan in the Deep South at that point in time. And we can still ask the same question: why are the police attacking African Americans, protesters or African Americans? Period. I mean, we just had a gentleman who was illegally arrested for watering his neighbor's lawn while black. I mean, for goodness sakes! I mean, this is how ridiculous it is.
It was a pastor.
It's a pastor, right?
And he was standing there just watering a lawn. That's it.
Here's what's the craziest part, if that's not crazy enough. The neighbor who called on him knew who he was, but didn't recognize him because all black people look alike in this country. So,
even here, sorry.
Yeah, so, I mean, so there you go, right? But yeah, I mean, it's. I remember asking my mom this. So I talked about her having those secret spaghetti dinners in the basement of the church when she was in high school, and she said, if we found out, that was illegal for whites and blacks to sit down and eat together. And that she said, we could have been arrested. The church could have been shut down. And I said, well, what about the separation of church and state? Here in the U.S., that's a pretty big, important thing. And she said, well, what about it? And she goes, oh, wait, did you actually think that was a thing back then? Right. So while we do have this Constitution that protects these certain rights, our interpretation and understanding of those rights evolve over time. We are trying to perfect a more perfect union. We haven't gotten there yet. And so our understanding, grows over time. Now, mind you, those police officers and so forth, attacking the protesters and things like that, I mean, you got to get your few licks in anyways. Famously in Birmingham, with the Freedom Rides, the police let the Klan in first to do all the attacking, take care of all the press and so forth. And then they came in and did some arresting, right? The Freedom Riders were arrested in Mississippi on breach of peace, which meant that you were breaching my peace and tranquility because of my very presence as a protester, or in many cases as an African American, that you breached my peace of mind, and that thus caused me to attack you. Right. So that's what you would have been arrested on, was breach of peace. But make no mistake about it, these guys were all in cahoots with each other.
Oh, completely.
This is all we had. What was, the White Citizens Council and the Sovereignty Commission and so forth, which was just the polite clan. They let the poor white trash clan, take care of the dirty work and stuff. Mm-hmm. I know
judges, police officers, you name it, attorney generals, they were all in cahoots back then.
Yeah. I mean, think about this for a moment. The Emmett Till case. During the trial, a member of the White Citizens Council came and visited all the jury members just to kind of, make sure they understood how they're supposed to vote.
Imagine if every person had the spirit of your mom at that stage, how different the world would be now. We would not actually have a man being arrested for doing something as kind as watering somebody else's garden. How ridiculous life really is, actually.
Right.
Loki, I mean, you do some incredible work, right? And you use a medium of creativity to be able to tell these stories of these people during the riots. And I mean, I've looked at all your movies. I mean, it's all about slavery and the Evers and After Selma, Black, White, and US and things of that sort. There's a burning desire to get these stories out through different mediums. Why is that?
I once had someone ask me, would I have sat at the lunch counters?
Mm-hmm. And your response?
Is I don't have to, because my mother already did.
Sure. And
that was kind of a cop-out answer, right? In respects of going, I don't know if I would have. Honestly, I don't know if I would have. And, I don't want to let people think that, well, I'm not, courageous enough. I mean, that's a special kind of courage that my mom and friends had.
Absolutely.
Let's be fair. And she's not the only one, of course. But it's just a handful of people when you consider what it really is. But I take to heart something my mother once said, which is, I can't do everything, but I can do something, because doing nothing's not an option.
Absolutely.
And my something was doing films. That was the gifts that I've been given, that I was blessed with, and was able to tell those stories through those mediums and stuff, through the books and what have you. And so that's just, my vehicle to try to make a difference. And sharing my mother's story is one of those things. It's a very powerful story, very powerful example. And so it needs to continue to be shared. So I do that, with assemblies in schools, using my books. I mean, I do it with public speaking at, corporate events in colleges, whatever else. TikTok, for example, is that other one. And it's kind of funny. I remember the first video I put on my mom, and one of the first comments was, "I can't believe I'm hearing a freedom rider on TikTok." Yeah. People don't believe these people are still alive either.
They don't. They really don't. It's like they're so 200-300 years ago. Right. And it hasn't been that long.
I remember when we were doing the film An Ordinary Hero. This is 2011 when we were shooting this. And one of my camera guys, in his early 20s, I was showing him the photo of the Anniston bus bombing, because we're going to be interviewing Hank Thomas, who's in that famous photo with it on fire, and he's in the foreground of the photo. And he said, "Well, where was this? Was this like South Africa?" And we literally said South Africa. I said, "No, this was Alabama." He goes, "What?" He had no idea this sort of stuff took place in the U.S. And he grew up here, college educated. Because here, particularly today, we don't like to talk about these things.
History is whitewashed.
Literally. And
yeah.
But it's Dr. King had a dream and Rosa Parks sat on a bus. But don't ask me why they did it. Right? We don't want to talk about what that was. Even I Have a Dream. It's the funny thing about the I Have a Dream March on Washington is that really wasn't what he came to talk about. He came and talked about the bill that is due. He's talking about reparations. And then the I Have a Dream part was just tacked on when Malia Jackson said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." So he just went off on that dream, as my mom likes to say. right? And it's a beautiful speech, but it's very safe for people who look like me. That's the Rainbow Coalition type of thing. It just sounds good, and it doesn't indict me, right? On the surface, and so we can let kids say these things, and that's great. Just don't ask any questions. And I tell people when I do diversity, equity, and inclusion training, it's not. I tell people this is not about what you didn't do. I don't blame you for what happened because you weren't part of that. That's not, you didn't own people. You weren't part of Jim Crow. Usually the people I'm talking to aren't, and I hope you don't own anyone today, right? That's a different discussion. But it's not about what you didn't do. It's about what you know now and what you're going to do with that going forward.
Absolutely.
That's where the accountability lies. And so, if we had more people like my mom today, who, even back then, we still need them today.
Oh,
right?
We need them. I think there's so many places I could go with conversations. So much. I'm feeling a part 2 coming up.
Oh, but, yeah, no problem.
So I want to just, share some stories. Your mom, Medgar Evers, Stokely Carmichael, MLK.
Yeah.
She spent time with all these individuals.
John Lewis.
John Lewis, yes. Did she share any stories with you regarding these individuals?
So Stokely was a student just like her. So that was the closest age group. When you ask her about Martin or Medgar, those were adults, they were in their 30s and such. But, she's a college student and stuff. And they had, wives and kids, and you don't want to hang around old people. So, but they were nice people, right? Dr. King, she didn't spend a lot of time with, so she doesn't have much to say regarding him, except for very eloquent speaker and very much a gentleman and these sort of things. Medgar, she spent more time with, would work in his office. So there was the NAACP office on Lynch Street in Jackson, and then right down the road was the CORE office, the Congress of Racial Equality, if I remember correctly. I got to work on my acronyms again. But when there was the work was done there, she would just go over to Medgar's office and help out, right? And Medgar and John Salter, who was the one Native American, actually, a lot of people think he's white, the Native American at the lunch counter with my mom and Ann Moody. Him and Medgar worked together very closely and put together the sit-in and the boycotts and so forth. But so her interactions were very limited in that regards, but does talk fondly about Medgar. I mean, in our house, it was always about Medgar because when we'd have civil rights people come over and so forth from her college days, that's what they talked about. They're reminiscing about Medgar and so forth. So that just kind of went there. Stokely, I actually met Stokely when I was very, very little. I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and he was speaking at some big event in DC, and this is at the point where he's the most feared black man in America, and it's down with whitey type of thing and whatever, and that misinterpretation of Black Power, quote. But she's there. She brings my brother and I along. I have an identical twin, and when there was a break, he's talking to some dignitaries, and the Nation of Islam is surrounding them and so forth, and these bodyguards, and people are like, yeah, you don't want to go talk to Stokely right now. It's not a good time. Don't do that, Joan. It might scare the kids and stuff. And she's like, well, no, he's a friend, right? And she walks up, and he sees her, stops his conversation with the suits, waves her over. She comes in and says, Stokely, I just want to introduce you to my children. And Stokely gets down on one knee. Now, Stokely's a tall guy. Gets down on one knee, eye level with my brother and I, starts asking us questions, right? Just what's your favorite color? Those sort of things, what you would ask a 3-year-old. And, shook our hands, and, and my mom, thanked him and let him go about his business there. But Stokely was always a friend, and or he might have had differences with folks. If you were a friend of the movement, you were a friend for life. And this was, she's talked to other white people in the civil rights movement who had that same experience with Stokely. And so it's an interesting, dynamic where there's one perception and then there's reality, right? And there's that misinterpretation of things like Black Power, what that means, and so forth.
The media was controlled, so they were able to put out the narrative that they wanted to put out.
Yeah.
Regarding Stokely, regarding the Black Panthers, and some other things like that.
Or even Dr. King. Remember Dr. King when he was killed? 70% of white America didn't like him, and I bet I would assume that probably 70% still don't like him, but they just like I Have a Dream.
The reality is, I mean, we just label people the way we want to, even up to currently, actually. I mean, you do a lot of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusive training. And I'm sure you'd pick up those sentiments when you're in those conversations, don't you?
Yeah.
People are very judgmental.
Yes.
And they have preconceived ideas as to how a certain ethnic group should behave or where their place should be. And I find that still applicable in the country I live in, actually.
Yeah.
So these conversations and the concept of humility and the concept of courage are conversations we need to have on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because if we fail to do it on platforms like these, there's an assumption that the narrative has changed for the better. The reality is we're still stuck in some archaic ways of the way we do stuff.
Yeah.
But how does Loki, and I respect the fact that you are your own individual, although you are Joan's son, right? But I need to ask one question before we go into you.
You got to put favorite son on there.
Oh, Joan's let's go with this. Joan's favorite son, Loki. Her surname, Trumpauer. Tell me a little bit more about that, please. Okay. How did it come about?
So Joan Trumpauer Mulholland is actually not her real name. So her maiden name is Joan Harris Nelson, right? And then she married Trumpauer, who was some high school sweetheart, when she came back from Duke. It lasted only a few months. He liked hitting people and she didn't like getting hit, And I guess apparently he showed up at one of the protests at Glen Echo Park, which is the local amusement park in DC, and just, right across in Maryland. Showed up to take her away from all this. And Hank Thomas, the one from the burning bus picture I talked about, he's a big guy, stepped between them. He said, yeah, you're not taking Joni anywhere, right? And there's some words exchanged, well, if you want to stay with these N-words, and, whatever, so forth and whatnot. But, she knew the family. And when she got down to Tougaloo, a reporter asked her name. And so it was Trumpauer, but she changed the spelling so that they couldn't trace it back to the family itself. Now, I said, that's not her real name, Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. Now, Mulholland is my dad's name, right? That's just, she married my dad, had 5 boys, and that didn't work out. So, but when I would talk to people about Joan Mulholland, civil rights people, they're like, who? And I was like, oh, Trumpauer. Like, oh yeah, of course. Like, then I would talk to, if I talked to people who knew her as Mulholland and didn't know her story, her background. I had teachers and neighbors who had no idea what she did in regards to the civil rights movement. She just kept on the radar because that's just what you did. You didn't talk about yourself. You didn't put yourself in front of anything. It was, you did it because it was the right thing to do. And, but they had no idea who Trumpauer was. And so, when I was doing the film, I decided, and there was these, I would look at articles and so forth. There was something from the Washington Post that just kind of caught my eye when they were doing an article about her. So I decided, I'm just going to put the two names together so that from a Google standpoint, if you're going to search her, you will find her either in, the Washington Post when they say Mulholland, or the New York Times when they say Trumpauer, or whatever it might be here and there. So the mashed together name is Joan Trumpauer Mulholland. But that's not really her name. It's just Joan Harris Mulholland.
She's just Joan. She's a
It's just,
powerhouse in her own.
it's just, hashtag be a Joan. That's what we use. But,
I love that.
But yeah, but I mean, it's fine. It works. People, everyone runs with it now. My mom just, accepts that, of course, except for when, we have to buy her plane tickets or whatever, obviously she's going to use what's on her government issued ID. Now she does actually have a t-shirt. It's her mugshot that I had made for her. And it's her mugshot. And down below it says, "This is my government issued ID." And she calls that her TSA t-shirt. And when she does go, and she wears it every time she flies. And the TSA at the National Airport, the Reagan National. If you live in the area, you don't call it Reagan National; it's just National. But that's her main airport. When she goes through, the TSA recognize her enough that they see that shirt. Now she still has to show her ID, of course.
Yeah.
But she did show up once for voting, her local voting precinct, and these are the people she's been in the same neighborhood with for 40 years. And they're like, "Well, yeah, we need your ID, Joan." She goes, "Yeah, it's right here." She points to her shirt. She goes, "Yes, we know that's you. But we actually really do need to see the ID." She goes, "You know who I am?" She goes, "Yes, I do. But unfortunately, this is what is required these days and stuff." So, but she likes to do that from time to time. Matter of fact, I'll tell her, if I could tell another story of my mom.
Oh, please.
But she was invited to the White House at one point during the Obama administration, of course.
So I was going to ask you a question about this. So continue to go on.
All right. So she's invited to the White House for some event, and she shows up, and they ask for her government issued ID. So she hands them her Library of Congress card, which is a pictured ID. Government issued. And like, "Man, we need to see a driver's license, blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "Well, this is a government issued ID. This is issued by the Congress, "Well, ma'am, this is what we require." She goes, "I understand there's a little, conflict between the White House and Congress right now, but this is my government issued ID." And apparently there was this standoff. "Well, ma'am, we can't let you in without the proper ID." Okay. But her name was on the list. "All right, come on through." She's like, "I don't need to be here. I've met the man before." She doesn't, but there it is, right?
In addition to being very humble, she strikes me as a woman who knows what she wants.
Yes.
And she does what she needs to do, and she just doesn't conform.
Oh,
She's
she
pretty
does not
stubborn
conform.
as well, right?
Yeah.
She strikes me as being pretty stubborn. So
Yeah.
did you get that trait from her, Loki?
Oh, sure I do. Yeah, no, and that whole nonviolence thing, with the civil rights movement. I mean, that all ended when she had children, because she was very quick to lay down the law, and that would come with a spanking or whatever. So everyone's, "Oh, she's so sweet." I'm like,
That's going outside the house.
I have no doubt she's amazing, actually. And there's elements of sweet in all of us. Yeah. I guess when it comes to our kids, we're a little bit. Do you have kids?
I do have 3 kids, and that's 2 girls, a boy and 2 girls, if I'm going to put them in order. And so one of the reasons I did the film An Ordinary Hero is not only because I wanted to preserve my mother's story, and I thought it was an important one to tell, but also because I had these 2 young girls at the time. And I wanted them to see these positive role models reflected back at them, female role models and stuff. And
how old are they?
Now they're, you would ask me that. Let's see, one's 23 and the other one's 21.
So they'll look at this like, "Dad, really?"
Yeah. Well, and they know that, and they, actually, when my daughter was 19, the youngest was 19, I pulled out one of the dresses that my mom wore when she was that age, sitting at the lunch counter, and had her put it on and sit at this counter to get a picture of her at that age. Wow, and she's the same size as my mom. She's probably a little taller, but my mom actually made the dress in high school. And so,
wow.
Yeah. She's
that's
beautiful,
a powerful image.
Courageous, creative, brains. I mean, she made her own dress. She's like multi-talented and multi-skilled, actually. Do you get your creativity from her?
Yeah, I'm sure from both my mom and dad. Yeah, and my dad, you know, a lot of people are like, what's your dad? Oh, he was an activist in his own right, you know, particularly when he grew up in Arizona, the Chicano movement. But he would also go, and during, in the 80s, he would go with his group. He's Catholic and POX, and they would go and protest at the Nevada test sites. And it got so routine that, you know, they knew like the guards and stuff. And it was like, oh, hey, Dan, hey, Scott, how you doing? You know, and how the kids, they'd go do their protest and get arrested. I found out later that my dad got arrested more than my mom ever did. Right. So, but, you know, that was his thing. And he would join her when they were married. You know, he would join her. You know, they went back to the Meredith March Against Fear. And what was that, 68 or something like that. 60, I can't remember the date now, but you know, at the tail end of that, where they were launching from Tougaloo College to the final march down to the Capitol building in Jackson. And my mom was really good at this. She just kind of name drops from time to time. And it's not like it's a name drop for bragging's sake, but we were walking on the campus of Tougaloo College in 2011 when we were shooting the film. And she goes, you know, she's kind of taking me along. And she goes, oh, yeah, and that's where we had breakfast with Marlon Brando. I'm like, wait, what? I remember I was in my car driving with my wife. I was telling her this story about this great Olympic athlete, but it was more about his college years, which I thought was even more fascinating. Because if you knew like the history of his college years and the injuries and so forth, like what he did in the Olympics was even more amazing. And I was like, and the person is, and I completely blanked. I was like, oh my gosh. So I was like, well, let me call my mom real quick. So I put my mom on speakerphone. I said, Mom, 1936, Berlin, you know, the Olympics, American athlete, African-American. She goes, oh yeah, Jesse Owens. I go, oh, that's it. She goes, yeah, I got his autograph somewhere. I said, wait, you met him? Oh yeah. You know, back during the movement. Jackie Robinson, Jesse Owens, you know, I mean, all these names. It's just like, but it was just like, oh yeah, oh yeah, that's right, I did meet him.
But you know what's so powerful about this share is the fact that your mom did it with the right intent.
Right.
Because if she did it with the intention for fame, or she would be telling these stories over and over and over. And you seem to be unraveling or establishing this through conversations rather than she talk about it. That's where genuine power and humility lies, actually. Make a difference for the right reasons.
Yeah. And as she says, you know, I ruined a perfectly good retirement. Because now she speaks all over the country and so forth.
Hey.
I mean, you take a look at John Lewis, for example, the late, you know, congressman. You know, John never went about talking about himself. Other people talked about him, and he was encouraged to tell these stories, but that wasn't what he was about. And so that was the rule of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So you're really hard pressed to get these individuals to talk about themselves. You'll see the same thing with like World War II veterans and the like. It's like, look, we just did it because that's what we were supposed to do. And it wasn't about them. Now, you do get those folks who it is about them, and I can name names, but the spotlight has been shined on some of these individuals because of some of the work that, you know, like myself have done, or just that, you know, my mom likes to say, after 50 years, we became interesting, you know. And so but it's important to understand and how much we do not know about this history and the details. Right.
A lot.
I'm finishing a short film called 544, a civil rights story. And it's a very short doc, about 7.5 minutes. And it's about this gentleman named George Sally. Now, the story is really about forgiveness. But George Sally, every day he's 92 years old. And every day he goes to the Edmund Pettus Bridge to pray for the state trooper that beat him on Bloody Sunday. You know, these are the type of stories we need to hear.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to take the opportunity to say thank you for telling these stories, because there's a lot of power in that. Because, I mean, for your kids and for the other kids as well, not every single, and I know you guys like Marvels and heroes,
right?
Not every single hero wears a cape.
Right.
This is so
They're
true.
amongst us.
Yeah.
And it is possible for each of us to be a hero in some way. We don't have to go tell everyone, but just do those instrumental or little things that makes a
Yeah.
difference in people's lives. I love the fact, the way you honor your mom actually with your foundation and the work that you do there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how you serve and the impact that you have? I know you hate
Yeah.
telling stories about
No, no,
yourself.
no, 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 no. It's just, you know,
Please do.
yeah. So we were doing a screening of An Ordinary Hero,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in 2013. And it was at Old Miss. Now, Old Miss is where James Meredith, integrated the school, and it took about 20,000 troops, sent down from the Kennedy administration to do so. It's often called the last battle of the Civil War, but he jokingly said, of course, but the American Civil War ended like 100 years before that. But nonetheless, yeah, I could get into that. I could go on, but total sidetrack. But so we were there. We did the screening. Matter of fact, we were there watching a film about Meredith as well. And Ross Barnett was the famous governor at that time, super racist guy, right? And my mom leans over and goes, "You know he's your cousin, right?" I'm like, "What?" That's the way my mom does things. But afterwards, we had college-educated kids come up to us who said, "We never learned any of this."
Mm.
And I'm going, in my mind, I'm going, "Look, like 70% of this movie takes place in your state. How do you not know this?" Now, instinctively, the first thing that I said was, "No, it's Mississippi. Of course, I'm not going to teach this, you know." But I was like, wait a second. Do people not really know about the civil rights movement? And I had grown up learning so much of this, I just assumed everyone else did.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't, not about the American civil rights movement. And so thus, I decided to create a foundation to share that story. And we had a little girl there. She had been about 9 years old, about the same age as my mother when she made that fateful decision in Georgia, and with the schoolhouse and so forth. And I was like, wow, I'm really impressed that she came and she loved it. She met my mom and so forth. But I'm like, not every 9-year-old is going to like a documentary. I was like, so I need to do some kids books. So I did this kid book. She stood for freedom, illustrated kids book. And the illustrator is actually a what's the best way to phrase this? A German refugee from Iran. Lives in New York. If that's not weird. Her family had immigrated to Iran, and then when the Shah was overthrown, they fled to New York. So anyway, but I was like, wow, create these kids books to help kind of tell the story to a younger group. And then it was like, well, not every kid's gonna be able to buy a book, right? So let me create a foundation to help facilitate and tell these stories, and to work with schools and the like. And so that's kind of became, the beginnings of the foundation. And now today we do a lot more than that. We have a Civil Rights Veteran Relief Fund where we provide support to civil rights veterans who, particularly during the pandemic, who needed financial aid because there were some well-known activists who were in the food lines, which blew my mind. I was like, wait, what?
Sure.
So, we did a lot with that. We have, we do scholarships for HBCUs. We're working with Tougaloo and Virginia State. This is first generation HBCU students, first generation college students at HBCUs. Let me rephrase that. And then we actually have what's called micro scholarships and micro grants, where every week we give $250. And this semester it is just HBCU students, but then we kind of go, who are also members of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, or so we kind of give different categories, but we do micro scholarships. We do the films. We have the DEI training. We have a workshop that we're going to be coming out with next year with a new book that I have called Get Back to the Counter, and 7 principles from a civil rights icon, where I take all my mom's stories and some stories we haven't heard and put those into context of these different principles of how you can also, create change and so forth.
Yeah, I love it. So Loki, I want to play something for you, and I want to see if you can just tell me what it means to you.
Oh, okay.
So Charmaine, just so that you know, Loki is part of Omega Phi Psi, which is a
You said that wrong.
I know I did.
You better retake that one.
He is a part of the Omega. Go ahead, Loki.
Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated.
So it is a historically Black fraternity, and his mom is she is a Delta, which is a historically Black sorority. So if you could just real quickly, and that song I played is George Clinton. That is their theme music. If I was to stand out on any campus, especially historically Black college, and put the radio on blast, they will come out of the woodwork. Real quick story. My sister graduated with the other masters, and after graduation, somebody turned on the song. In the middle of the street, you saw men come from everywhere dancing, doing their stroll to that song. So how did you and your mom end up in both that fraternity and sorority?
Well, for my mom, there wasn't much of a difference between a Delta Sigma Theta sorority meeting and a civil rights meeting at Tougaloo College. And the AKAs were the goody two shoes. So her roommate is Joyce Ladner, who was the first Black female president of Howard University. And, it was just a natural thing, part of the social life and so forth of the campus. And so she was just like anybody who joins, those, what is called the Divine Nine. I can't speak for anything outside Divine Nine, but you are invited to join. And maybe you get accepted even after your invitation. And so, my mom, was invited, and the rest is history. she is recognized as one of the first white members of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. But I remember there was someone asked her once, well, why did you join a Black sorority? And I think it was a white lady, matter of fact, who was a little confused. And I think she might have emphasized the word Black a little bit. And my mom says, well, I was at a Black campus. What else would I join? It's like, there were no white sororities at Tougaloo College. Agreed. I think that lady's head spin, not realizing that my mom had integrated Tougaloo College.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, my apologies. Carry on.
No, please.
Was your mom the first white woman to attend a Black college?
No, she's not the first white woman to attend a Black college. She is the first, at Tougaloo College.
Okay. It's still incredible, actually.
Oh no, it is. My mom
to defy the odds to be able to demonstrate her desire to unify people. That's power.
And she just doesn't get into that sort of stuff, like, oh, you're the first this, the first that. Great, wonderful. I mean, I'll tell her, I'm like, hey, Mom, we have 22 million views on TikTok. She's like,
so
okay.
Loki, so
yes.
Please explain your Black fraternity, because you don't look Black to me.
No. Traditionally, Mega Sci-Fi Fraternity Incorporated, founded on Howard University campus, is a traditional Black fraternity. But they've had members who look like me and are Hispanic and Asian for many years. Now it's still we just recently had our conclave, which is our big, huge, national.
It's a big party. It's a big party.
It was
They take over a city.
Yes, we do.
They took it. What was it? Charlotte? Yeah, they just took over Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I'm still a unicorn.
You're a rebel, just like your mom, right?
Yeah. And needless to say, you're going to stand out if you look like me. And I do get fraternity members who are like, I've never met a white member before. But it just is what it is. But so my journey was, I was actually attending a meeting in Utah. My wife and I lived in Utah for 22 years before we moved back to Virginia, and she's from Utah. As I jokingly say, like, how'd you end up in Utah? I said, well, I learned that after you got married, your wife tells you where you live. So my wife just kind of gives me the side eye on that one. But nonetheless, so we So I was attending a meeting, and a friend of mine had, on his lapel, well, the shield and so forth. And I was like, "Oh, are you a Q?" He goes, "Yeah." I says, "Yep." Is there a chapter here? He goes, "Yeah, there's a grad chapter." I said, "What's a grad chapter?" And see, I assumed that the ship sailed because I figured that was just a college thing, and which is true for a lot of fraternities and sororities, but not with the Divine Nine. We have, grad chapters where after you've graduated, sometimes you go to schools that don't have, those opportunities, and so, but you can later on if you measure up, to the standards. And so I was like, wow, okay. So that got me really intrigued. And I had already, been hanging around a lot of folks and stuff. And I remember it was called the Dean of Pledge. My dean had asked me, have you talked to your mom about this? And I was like, well, no. Why don't you ask her? So I said, ask her why the Qs? And I said, well, Mom, I said, Mom, if I was to join one of these fraternities, which one should I join? And she says, well, I'll tell you what. When I went to school, Tougaloo College, she goes, the alphas were about looking good. The omegas were about doing good. And Mom's never wrong. So I was like, well, right on. And my heart was already set with the Qs anyway, so it didn't matter. I get folks like, well, what if your mom said the alpha? What is this? Well, my mom didn't, because my mom's not wrong. So it wouldn't matter anyways. I would have just said, well, whatever, Mom. But yeah, so here we are. I probably should tell this story. I just found out like last week. So a chapter brother at Iota chapter in Salt Lake City, where I crossed, that had told me this, that when my mom had come out for some event, and this chapter brother's wife is a Delta, and they're at this event, and he took my mom aside. This is before I crossed. I said, so what do you think about your boy, wanting to pledge Omega Psi Phi? She goes, well, I hope he makes it. Just don't kill him. I'm just going to leave it at that. And here I am today.
Well, congratulations.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's Mom, right? Yeah. My mom has got a sharp wit and so forth. And it definitely creates a unique, it's a unique dynamic, it's a unique experience. There's, honestly, at the Clave, I was there going, man, you really feel like you stand out, right? And that eyes are on you, and is there judgment on you, which was just something I was projecting, because there isn't that. But you can put yourself in some uncomfortable situations, and it's like, gee, this is what happens when you're a minority, or if you're the only, right? This is what it must feel like sometimes. And this is amongst brothers, fraternity brothers, when it's all about love, fraternal spirit, and it's like, and yet I can still have that sense of feeling. I remember this recently at a chapter meeting, we were talking about, we're having this event coming up where we're going to be working with some high school students, some sort of like job fair type of thing. And one of the fraternity brothers gets up and says, we look, and we want these, we need you all to sign up for these. Here's the list of different jobs and so forth. We need you all to sign up because we need some, we need these kids to see, strong black, examples and so forth of black men and blah, blah, blah. So he comes up to me afterward. He goes, so what are you going to sign up for? I'm like, well, you said strong black men. I don't fit any of those categories. He goes, man, sign up. I was like, well, I thought you were being very specific. I was just going to show up and provide some ground support. That was all. He goes, the kids need to see anybody. It doesn't, it's like, but, but there's a lot of great work that we do. I mean,
they do amazing work across the country.
Yeah,
as a fraternity.
And we're known for quite a few things. We have a lot of fun, but when it's all said and done, it's
community
down to the work.
Yep,
in the community. So yeah,
I mean, we could talk to you forever. I'm enjoying the conversation, Charmaine, because I want to be respectful of your time. And Charmaine, you have anything you'd like to share or add or ask?
you spoke about just one comment, right? About putting yourself in uncomfortable
Mhm.
positions. Because personally, I feel that's where the biggest growth is, and you'd be able
Yes.
to look at things from a different perspective. Loki, what would you like to leave our listeners with? I mean, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm grateful for your time. Is there a final point that you would like to land for people to consider?
Consider my mother's story. Consider, um, what she looks like. She was this young white woman, right? A very ordinary individual uh, who saw something was wrong and decided to do something about it. She wasn't a Dr. King. She wasn't a Rosa Parks, a Harriet Tubman or whomever. She was just one person who decided that she could make a difference, and that you just have to make the choice. We all have that opportunity to do so, but just as importantly, and I this is what we emphasize in our DEI training, which circles around her story and utilizes all of our different films. It's about our focus is about empathy. And part of that is, again, like we talked about, those uncomfortable places, but really having an understanding of other lived experiences. That's not to negate yours. That's just to say that there are other experiences, and understand that, and create a place, which is what my mother was trying to do in the civil rights movement, was to create a place, in her case, America, to create a place where people can, feel welcome and feel safe and feel that they truly are a part of something. And that's what we all should be striving for. Um, I'll leave you this last thought. My mother and I were speaking at a middle school in Maryland, and I didn't feel like it was getting home, one of the points that we're trying to make. And so I said, what did we do before we started this assembly? And it was the entire school, and the school board was there too. It's a very small town. So we did the Pledge of Allegiance. I said, you all stood up, you all put your hand on your heart, and you made an oath. You made a commitment to the flag that represents this country and its principles. And we said that those principles are liberty and justice for who? And they said, for all. I said, what does that mean? I said, you made a commitment to make a change, to make sure that everyone has those liberties, has that justice. Now, what are you going to do about it? And that's how we all should be looking at it.
Oh, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for the work that you do. And tell your mum I appreciate all that she's done. And I'm grateful for all that you are doing. And just love and light to you both. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Loki, on behalf of my grandparents, my parents, my brothers, my sisters, my family, my children, thank you to you and your family for what y'all have done. It wasn't just your mom. She started it. You're continuing it. We appreciate all that you're doing in our communities. We value you guys. You guys are natural treasures that more people need to know the work that you're doing and the work that you guys have done. So we love you. Thank you. This has been another Ubuntu Connected conversation with the man himself, Loki Mulholland. Check him out. Follow him on TikTok. That's where I found him. Some great content out there. And if there's any way that any of us can serve you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Love and light, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.